Assalamu alaikum. Hello, welcome back. James and the Giant Peach. We left off. That peach had rolled down the hill, flattened Aunt Sponge and Aunt Spiker, and went off a cliff straight into the ocean. So let's continue on and see what happens to James and his insect friends next. Chapter 17. At this moment, the scene inside the peach itself was one of indescribable chaos. James Henry Trotter was lying bruised and battered on the floor of the room amongst a tangled mass of centipede and earthworm and spider and ladybird and glowworm and old green grasshopper. In the whole history of the world, no travelers had ever had a more terrible journey than these unfortunate creatures. It had started out well, with much laughing and shouting, and for the first few seconds, as the peach had begun to roll slowly forward, nobody had minded being tumbled about a little bit. And when it went bump, and the centipede had shouted, "That was Aunt Sponge!" and then bump again, and "That was Aunt Spiker," there had been a tremendous burst of cheering all around. But as soon as the peach rolled out of the garden and began to go down the steep hill, rushing and plunging and bounding madly downward, then the whole thing had become a nightmare. James found himself being flung up against the ceiling, then back onto the floor, then sideways against the wall, then up onto the ceiling again, and up and down and back and forth and round, and at the same time all the other creatures were flying through the air in every direction. And so were the chairs and the sofa, not to mention the 42 boots belonging to the centipede. Everything and all of them were being rattled around like peas inside an enormous rattle that was being rattled by a mad giant who refused to stop. To make it worse, something went wrong with the glowworm's lighting system, and the room was in pitchy darkness. There were screams and yells and curses and cries of pain, and everything kept going round, and once James made a frantic grab at some thick bars sticking out from the wall, only to find out that they were a couple of the centipede's legs. "Let go, you idiot!" shouted the centipede, kicking himself free, and James was promptly flung across the room into the old green grasshopper's horny lap. Twice he had got tangled up in Mrs. Spider's legs, a horrid business, and towards the end, the poor earthworm, who was cracking himself like a whip every time he flew through the air from one side of the room to the other, coiled himself around James's body in a panic and refused to unwind. Oh, it was a frantic and terrible trip. But it was all over now, and the room was suddenly very still and quiet. Everybody was beginning slowly and painfully to disentangle himself from everybody else. "Let's have some light," shouted the centipede. "Yes," they cried, "light! Give us some light!" "I'm trying," answered the poor glowworm. "I'm doing my best. Please be patient." They all waited in silence. Then a faint greenish light began to glimmer out of the glowworm's tail, and this gradually became stronger and stronger until it was anyway enough to see by. "Some great journey," the centipede said, limping across the room. "I shall never be the same again," murmured the earthworm. "Nor I," said the ladybird. "It's taken years off my life." "But my dear friends," cried the old green grasshopper, trying to be cheerful, "we are there." "Where?" they asked. "Where? Where is there?" "I don't know," the old grasshopper said, "but I'll bet it's somewhere good." "We are probably at the bottom of a coal mine," the earthworm said gloomily. "We certainly went down and down and down very suddenly at the last moment. I felt it in my stomach. I still feel it." "Perhaps we were in the middle of a beautiful country full of songs and music," the old green grasshopper said. "Or near the seashore," said James eagerly, "with lots of other children down on the sand for me to play with." "Pardon me," murmured the ladybird, turning pale. "But am I wrong in thinking that we seem to be bobbing up and down?" "Bobbing up and down!" they cried. "What on earth do you mean?" "We're still giddy from the journey," the old green grasshopper told her. "You'll get over it in a minute. Is everybody ready to go upstairs now and take a look round?" "Yes, yes," they chorused. "Come on, let's go." "I refuse to show myself out of doors in my bare feet," the centipede said. "I have to get my boots on first." "For heaven's sake, let's not go through all that nonsense again," the earthworm said. "Let's all lend the centipede a hand and get it over with," the ladybird said. "Come on." So they did, all except Miss Spider, who set about weaving a long rope ladder that would reach from the top floor up to a hole in the ceiling. The old green grasshopper had wisely said they must not risk going out of the side entrance when they didn't know where they were, but must first of all go up to the top of the peach and have a look around. So half-hour later, when the rope ladder had been finished and hung and the 42nd boot had been laced neatly on Mr. Centipede's 42nd foot, they were all ready to go out. Amidst mounting excitement and shouts of "Here we go, boys! The promised land! I can't wait to see it!" the whole company climbed up the ladder one by one and disappeared into a dark, soggy tunnel in the ceiling that went steeply, almost vertically upward. Chapter 18. A minute later, They were out in the open, standing on the very top of the peach near the stem, blinking their eyes in the strong sunlight and peering nervously around. What happened? Where are we? But this is impossible! Unbelievable! Terrible! I told you we were bobbing up and down, the ladybird said. We're in the middle of the sea, cried James. And indeed they were. A strong current and a high wind had carried the peach so quickly away from the shore that already the land was out of sight. All around them lay the vast black ocean, deep and hungry. Little waves were bibbling against the sides of the peach. But how did it happen, they cried. Where are the fields? Where are the woods? Where is England? Nobody, not even James, could understand how in the world a thing like this could have come about. Ladies and gentlemen, the old green grasshopper said, trying very hard to keep the fear and disappointment out of his voice, I am afraid that we find ourselves in a rather awkward situation. Awkward, cried the earthworm. My dear old grasshopper, we are finished. Every one of us is about to perish. I may be blind, you know, but that much I can see quite clearly. Off with my boots, shouted the centipede. I cannot swim with my boots on. I can't swim at all, cried the ladybird. Nor can I, wailed the glowworm. Nor I, said Miss Spider. None of us three girls can swim a single stroke. But you won't have to swim, said James calmly. We are floating beautifully, and sooner or later a ship is bound to come along and pick us up. They all stared at him in amazement. Are you quite sure that we are not sinking, the ladybird asked. Of course I'm sure, answered James. Go and look for yourself. They all ran over to the side of the peach and peered down at the water below. The boy is quite right, the old green grasshopper said. We are floating beautifully. Now we must all sit down and keep perfectly calm. Everything will be all right in the end. What absolute nonsense, cried the earthworm. Nothing is ever all right in the end, and, well, you know it. Poor earthworm, the ladybird said, whispering in James' ear. He loves to make everything into a disaster. He hates to be happy. He is only happy when he is gloomy. Now isn't that odd? But then I suppose just being an earthworm is enough to make a person pretty gloomy, don't you agree? If this peach is not going to sink, the earthworm was saying, and if we are not going to be drowned, then every one of us is going to starve to death instead. Do you realize that we haven't had a thing to eat since yesterday morning? By golly, he's right, cried Centipede. For once, Earthworm is right. Of course I'm right, the earthworm said, and we're not likely to find anything around here either. We shall get thinner and thinner and thirstier, and we shall die a slow and grisly death from starvation. I'm dying already. I am slowly shriveling up for want of food. Personally, I would rather drown. But good heavens, you must be blind, said James. You know very well I'm blind, snapped the earthworm. There's no need to rub it in. I didn't mean that, said James quickly. I'm sorry, but can't you see that? See? Shouted the poor earthworm. How can I see if I'm blind? James took a deep, slow breath. Can't you realize, he said patiently, that we have enough food here to last us for weeks and weeks? Where? They said, where? Why, the peach, of course. Our whole ship is made of food. Jumping Jehoshaphat, they cried. We never thought of that. My dear James, said the old green grasshopper, laying a front leg affectionately on James's shoulder, I don't know what we'd do without you. You are so clever. Ladies and gentlemen, we are saved again. We are most certainly not, said the earthworm. You must be crazy. We can't eat the ship. It's the only thing that's keeping us up. We shall starve if we don't, said the centipede, and we shall drown if we do, cried the earthworm. Oh dear, said the old green grasshopper. Now we're worse off than before. Couldn't we just eat a little bit of it, asked Miss Spider. I am so dreadfully hungry. You can eat all you want, James answered. It would take us weeks and weeks to make any sort of dent in this enormous peach. Surely you can see that. Good heavens, he's right again, cried the old green grasshopper, clapping his hands. It would take weeks and weeks, of course it would. But let's not go making a lot of holes all over the deck. I think we'd better simply scoop it out of that tunnel over there, the one that we've just come up by. An excellent idea, said Ladybird. What are you looking so worried about, Earthworm? The centipede asked. What's the problem? The problem is, the earthworm said, the problem is there is no problem. Everyone burst out laughing. Cheer up, Earthworm, they said. Come and eat. And they all went over to the tunnel entrance and began scooping out great chunks of juicy, golden-colored peach flesh. Oh, marvelous, said the centipede, stuffing it into his mouth. Delicious, said the old grasshopper. Just fabulous, said the glowworm. Oh my, said the ladybird primly. What a heavenly taste. She looked up at James and she smiled, and James smiled back at her. They sat down on the deck together, both of them chewing away happily. You know, James, the ladybird said, up until this moment I have never in my life tasted anything except those tiny little green flies that live on rose bushes. They have a perfectly delightful flavor, but this peach is even better. Isn't it glorious, Miss Spider said, coming over to join them. Personally, I had always thought that a big, juicy, caught-in-the-web bluebottle was the finest dinner in the world, until I tasted this. "What a flavor," the centipede cried. "It's terrific. There's nothing like it. There never has been, and I should know because I personally have tasted all the finest foods in the world." Whereupon the centipede, with his mouth full of peach and with juice running down all over his chin, suddenly burst into song. "I've eaten many strange and scrumptious dishes in my time, like jellied gnats and dandy prats and earwigs cooked in slime. And mice with rice, they're really nice when roasted in their prime, but don't forget to sprinkle them with just a pinch of grime. I've eaten fresh mud burgers by the greatest cooks there are, and scrambled dregs and stink bugs' eggs, and hornets stewed in tar, and pails of snails and lizards' tails, and beetles by the jar. A beetle is improved by just a splash of vinegar. I often eat boiled slobbages, they're grand when served beside, minced doodlebugs and curried slugs, and have you ever tried mosquitoes' toes and wumpfish roes, most delicately fried? The only trouble is they disagree with my inside. I'm mad for crispy waspings on a piece of buttered toast, and pickled spines of porcupines, and then a gorgeous roast of dragon's flesh, well hung, not fresh, it cost £1 at most, and comes to you in barrels if you order it by post. I crave the tasty tentacles of octopi for tea. I like hot dogs, I love hot frogs, and surely you'll agree. A plate of soil with engine's oil, a super recipe. I hardly need to mention that it's practically free. For dinner on my birthday, I should tell you what I chose. Hot noodles made from poodles on a slice of garden hose, and a rather smelly jelly made of armadillo's toes. The jelly is delicious, but you have to hold your nose. Now comes, the centipede declared, the burden of my speech. These foods are rare beyond compare, some are right out of reach, but there's no doubt I'd go without 1,000,000 plates of each for one small bite, one tiny bite of this fantastic peach. Everybody was feeling happy now. The sun was shining brightly out of a soft blue sky, and the day was calm. The giant peach, with the sunlight glinting on its side, was like a massive golden ball sailing upon a silver sea. Chapter 19. "Look," cried the centipede, just as they were finishing their meal. "Look at that funny thin black thing gliding through the water over there." They all swung round to look. "There are 2 of them," said Miss Spider. "There are lots of them," said the ladybird. "What are they?" asked the earthworm, getting worried. "They must be some kind of fish," said the old green grasshopper. Perhaps they've come to say hello." "They are sharks," cried the earthworm. "I bet you anything like that they are sharks and they have come to eat us up." "What absolute rot," the centipede said, but his voice seemed suddenly to have become a little shaky, and he wasn't laughing. "I am positive they are sharks," said the earthworm. "I just know they are sharks," and so, in fact, did everybody else, but they were too frightened to admit it. There was a short silence. They all peered down anxiously at the sharks, who were cruising slowly round and round the peach. "Just assuming that they are sharks," the centipede said, "there still can't possibly be any danger if we stay up here." But even as they spoke, one of those thin black fins suddenly changed direction and came cutting swiftly through the water right up to the side of the peach itself. The shark paused and stared up at the company with small, evil eyes. "Go away," they shouted. "Go away, you filthy beast!" Slowly, almost lazily, the shark opened his mouth, which was big enough to have swallowed a perambulator, and made a lunge at the peach. They all watched, aghast. And now, as though at a signal from the leader, all the other sharks came swimming in towards the peach, and they clustered around it and began to attack it furiously. There must have been 20 or 30 of them at least, all pushing and fighting and lashing their tails and churning the water into a froth. Panic and pandemonium broke out immediately on top of the peach. "Oh, we are finished now," cried Miss Spider, wringing her feet. "They will eat up the whole peach, and then there'll be nothing left for us to stand on, and they'll start on us." "She's right," shouted the ladybird. "We are lost forever." "Oh, I don't want to be eaten," wailed the earthworm, "but they will take me first of all because I am so fat and juicy, and I have no bones." Is there nothing we can do?" asked the ladybird, appealing to James. "Surely you can think of a way out of this." Suddenly, they were all looking at James. "Think," begged Miss Spider. "Think, James, think." "Come on," said the centipede. "Come on, James, there must be something we can do." Their eyes waited upon him, tense, anxious, pathetically hopeful. Chapter 20. "There is something that I believe we might try," James Henry Trotter said slowly. "I'm not saying it'll work." "Tell us," cried the earthworm. "Tell us quick." "We'll try anything you say," said the centipede, "but hurry, hurry, hurry." "Be quiet and let the boy speak," said the ladybird. "Go on, James." They all moved a little bit closer to him. There was a longish pause. "Go on," they cried frantically. "Go on." And all the time, while they were waiting, they could hear the sharks threshing about in the water below them. It was enough to make anyone frantic. "Come on, James," the ladybird said, coaxing him. I'm afraid it's no good after all," James murmured, shaking his head. "I'm terribly sorry. I forgot. We don't have any string. We need hundreds of yards of string to make this work." "What sort of string?" asked the old green grasshopper sharply. Any sort, just as long as it's strong. But my dear boy, that's exactly what we have. We've got all you want. How? Where? The silkworm, cried the old green grasshopper. Didn't you ever notice the silkworm? She's still downstairs. She never moves. She just lies there sleeping all day long. But we can easily wake her up and make her spin. And what about me, may I ask? Said Miss Spider. I can spin just as well as any silkworm. What's more, I can spin patterns. Can you make enough between you? Said James. As much as you want. And quickly? Of course, of course. And would it be strong? The strongest there is, as thick as your finger. But why? What are you going to do? I'm going to lift this peach clear of the water, James announced firmly. You're mad, cried the earthworm. It's our only chance. The boy's crazy. He's joking. Go on, James, the ladybird said gently. How are you going to do it? Skyhooks, I suppose, jeered the centipede. Seagulls, James answered calmly. The place is full of them. Look up there. They all looked up and saw a great mass of seagulls wheeling round and round in the sky. I'm going to take a long silk string, James went on, and I'm going to loop one end of it round a seagull's neck, and then I'm going to tie the other end to the stem of the peach. He pointed to the peach stem, which was standing up like a short, thick mask in the middle of the deck. Then I'm going to get another seagull and do the same thing again, then another and another. Ridiculous, they shouted. Absurd! Poppycock! Balderdash! Madness! And the old green grasshopper said, how can a few seagulls lift an enormous thing like this up into the air, and all of us as well? It would take hundreds, thousands. There is no shortage of seagulls, James answered. Look for yourself. We'll need maybe 400, 500, 600, maybe even 1,000, I don't know. I shall simply go on hooking them up to the stem until we have enough to lift us. They'll be bound to lift us in the end. It's like balloons. You give someone enough balloons to hold, I mean really enough, then up he goes. And a seagull has far more lifting power than a balloon. If only we have the time to do it. If only we are not sunk first by those awful sharks. You're absolutely off your head, said the earthworm. How on earth do you propose to get a loop of string round a seagull's neck? I suppose you're going to fly up yourself and catch it. The boy's dotty, said the centipede. Let him finish, said the ladybird. Go on, James. How would you do it? With bait. Bait? What sort of bait? With a worm, of course. Seagulls love worms, didn't you know that? And luckily for us, we have the biggest, fattest, pinkest, juiciest earthworm in the world. You can stop right there, the earthworm said sharply. That's quite enough. Go on, the other said, beginning to grow interested. Go on. The seagulls have already spotted him, James continued. That's why there are so many of them circling around. But they daren't come down to get him while the rest of us are standing here. So this is what... Stop, cried the earthworm. Stop, stop, stop. I won't have it. I refuse. Be quiet, said the centipede. Mind your own business. I like that. My dear earthworm, you're going to be eaten anyway, so what's the difference does it make whether it's sharks or seagulls? I won't do it. Why don't we hear the plan first, said the old green grasshopper. I don't give a hoot what the plan is, cried the earthworm. I am not going to be pecked to death by a bunch of seagulls. You will be a martyr, said the centipede. I shall respect you for the rest of my life. So will I, said Miss Spider, and your name will be in all the newspapers. Earthworm gives life to save friends. But he won't have to give his life, James told them. Now listen to me. This is what we'll do. Chapter 21. Why, it's absolutely brilliant, cried the old green grasshopper when James had explained his plan. The boy's a genius, the centipede announced. Now I can keep my boots on after all. Oh, I shall be pecked to death, wailed the poor earthworm. Of course you won't. I will. I know I will, and I won't even be able to see them coming at me because I have no eyes. James went over and put an arm gently around the earthworm's shoulders. I won't let them touch you, he said. I promise I won't. But we've got to hurry. Look down there. There were more sharks than ever now around the peach. The water was boiling with them. There must have been 90 or 100 at least. And to the travelers up on top, it certainly seemed as though the peach was sinking lower and lower into the water. Action station, James shouted. Jump to it. There was not a moment to lose. He was the captain now, and everyone knew it. They would do whatever he told them. All hands below deck except Earthworm, he ordered. Yes, yes, they said eagerly as they scuttled into the tunnel entrance. Come on, let's hurry. And you, centipede, James shouted, hop downstairs and get that silkworm to work at once. Tell her to spin as she's never spun before. Our lives depend on it. Excuse me. And the same applies to you, Miss Spider. Hurry on down. Start spinning. Chapter 22. In a few minutes, everything was ready. It was very quiet now on top of the peach. There was nobody in sight, nobody except the earthworm. One half of the earthworm, looking like great, thick, juicy pink sausage, lay innocently in the sun for all the seagulls to see. The other half of him was dangling down the tunnel. James was crouching close beside the earthworm in the tunnel entrance, just below the surface, waiting for the first seagull. He had a loop of silk string in his hand. The old green grasshopper and the ladybird were further down the tunnel, holding on to the earthworm's tail, ready to pull him quickly in out of danger as soon as James gave the word. And far below, in the great stone of the peach, the glowworm was lighting up the room so that the two spinners, the silkworm and Miss Spider, could see what they were doing. The centipede was down there too, exhorting them both frantically to greater efforts, and every now and again, James could hear his voice coming up faintly from the depths, shouting, "Spin, silkworm, spin, you great, fat, lazy brute! Faster, faster, we'll throw you to the sharks!" "Here comes the first seagull," whispered James. "Keep still now, Earthworm, keep still. The rest of you get ready to pull." "Please don't let it spike me," begged the earthworms. I won't, shh." Out of the corner of one eye, James watched the seagull as it came swooping down towards the earthworm. And then suddenly it was so close that he could see its small black eyes and curved beak, and the beak was open, ready to grab a nice piece of flesh out of the earthworm's back. "Pull!" shouted James. The old green grasshopper and the ladybird gave the earthworm's tail an enormous tug, and like magic, the earthworm disappeared into the tunnel. At the same time, up went James's hand, and the seagull flew right into the loop of silk that he was holding out. The loop, which had been cleverly made, tightened just the right amount, but not too much around its neck, and the seagull was captured. "Hooray!" shouted the old green grasshopper, peering out of the tunnel. "Well done, James!" Up flew the seagull, with James paying out the silk string as it went. He gave it about 50 yards and then tied the string to the stem of the peach. "Next one!" he shouted, bringing back into the tunnel. "Up you get again, earthworm. Bring up some more silk, centipede." "Oh, I don't like this at all," wailed the earthworm. "It's only just missed me. I even felt the wind on my back as it went wishing past." "Shh," whispered James. "Keep still. Here comes another one." So they did it again, and again, and again, and again. And the seagulls kept coming, and James caught them one after the other and tethered them to the peach stem. 100 seagulls, he shouted, wiping the sweat from his face. "Keep going," they cried. "Keep going, James." 200 seagulls, 300 seagulls, 400 seagulls. The sharks, as though sensing they were in danger of losing their prey, were hurling themselves at the peach more furiously than ever, and the peach was sinking lower and lower still into the water. 500 seagulls, James shouted. "Silkworm says she's running out of silk," yelled the centipede from below. "She said she can't keep it up much longer, nor can Miss Spider." "Tell them they've got to," James answered. "They can't stop now." "We're lifting," somebody shouted. "No, we're not. I felt it." "Put out another seagull, quick." "Quiet, everybody, quiet. Here's one coming now." This was the 501st seagull, and the moment that James caught it and tethered it to the stem with all the others, the whole enormous peach suddenly started rising up slowly out of the water. "Look out! Here we go! Hold on, boys!" But then it stopped, and there it hung. It hovered and swayed, but it went no higher. The bottom of it was just touching the water. It was like a delicately balanced scale that needed only the tiniest push to tip it one way or the other. "One more will do it," shouted the old green grasshopper looking out of the tunnel. "We're almost there." And now came the big moment. Quickly, the 502nd seagull was caught and harnessed to the peach stem, and then suddenly, but slowly, majestically, like some fabulous golden balloon, with all the seagulls straining at the strings above, the giant peach rose up, dripping out of the water, and began climbing towards the heavens. Chapter 23. In a flash, everybody was up on top. "Oh, isn't it beautiful?" they cried. "What a marvelous feeling! Goodbye, sharks. Oh boy, this is the way to travel." Miss Spider, who was literally squealing with excitement, grabbed the centipede by the waist, and the two of them started dancing round and round the peach stem together. The earthworm stood up on his tail and did a sort of wriggle of joy all by himself. The old green grasshopper kept hopping higher and higher into the air. The ladybird rushed over and shook James warmly by the hand. The glowworm, who at the best of times was a very shy and silent creature, sat glowing with pleasure near the tunnel entrance. Even the silkworm, looking white and thin and completely exhausted, came creeping out of the tunnel to watch this miraculous ascent. Up and up they went, and soon they were as high as the top of a church steeple above the ocean. "I'm a bit worried about the peach," James said to the others, as soon as all the dancing and shouting had stopped. "I wondered how much damage the sharks have done to it underneath. It's quite impossible to tell from up here." "Why don't I go over to the side and make an inspection?" Miss Spider said. "It'll be no trouble at all, I assure you." And without waiting for an answer, she quickly produced a length of silk thread and attached the end of it to the peach stem. "I'll be back in a jiffy," she said, and then she walked calmly over to the edge of the peach and jumped off, paying out the thread behind her as she fell. The others crowded anxiously around the place where she had gone over. "Wouldn't it be dreadful if the thread broke?" the ladybird said. There was a rather long silence. "Are you all right, Miss Spider?" shouted the old green grasshopper. "Yes, thank you," her voice answered from below. "I'm coming up now. and up she came, climbing foot over foot up the silk thread, and at the same time tucking the thread back cleverly into her body as she climbed past it. "Is it awful?" they asked her. "Is it all eaten away? Are there great holes in it everywhere?" Miss Spider clambered back onto the deck with a pleased but also rather puzzled look on her face. "You won't believe this," she said, "but actually there's hardly any damage at all down there. The peach is almost untouched. There are just a few tiny pieces out of it here and there, but nothing more." "You must be mistaken," James told her. "Of course she's mistaken," the centipede said. "I promise you I'm not," Miss Spider answered. "But there were hundreds of sharks around us. They churned the water into froth. We saw their great mouths opening and shutting." "I don't care what you saw," Miss Spider answered. "They certainly didn't do much damage to the peach." "Then why didn't we start sinking?" the centipede asked. "Perhaps we didn't start sinking," the old green grasshopper suggested. "Perhaps we were all so frightened that we simply imagined it." That is, in point of fact, was closer to the truth than any of them knew. A shark, you see, has an extremely long, sharp nose, and its mouth is set very awkwardly underneath its face and a long way back. This makes it more or less impossible for it to get its teeth into a vast, smooth, curving surface, such as the side of a peach. Even if the creature turns on its back, it still can't do it, because the nose always gets in the way. If you have ever seen a small dog try and get its teeth into an enormous ball, then you will be able to imagine roughly how it was with the sharks and the peach. "It must have been some kind of magic," the ladybird said. "The holes must have healed up by themselves." "Oh, look, there's a ship below us," shouted James. Everybody rushed to the side and peered over. None of them had ever seen a ship before. "It looks like a big one. It's got 3 funnels. You can even see the people on the decks. Let's wave to them. Do you think they can see us?" Neither James nor any of the others knew it, but the ship that was now passing beneath them was actually the Queen Mary, sailing out of the English Channel on her way to America. And on the bridge of the Queen Mary, the astonished captain was standing with a group of his officers, all of them gaping at the great round ball hovering overhead. "I don't like it," the captain said. "Nor do I," said the first officer. "Do you think it's following us?" said the second officer. "I tell you I don't like it," muttered the captain. "It could be dangerous," the first officer said. "That's it," cried the captain. "It's a secret weapon. Holy Cat, send a message to the Queen at once. The country must be warned, and give me Ray telescope." Excuse me. The first officer handed the telescope to the captain. The captain put it to its eye. "There's birds everywhere," he cried. "The whole sky is teeming with birds. What in the world are they doing? And wait a second. There are people on it. I can see them moving. There's do I have this darn thing focused right? It looks like a little boy in short trousers. Yes, I can distinctly see a little boy in short trousers standing up there. And there's a sort of giant ladybird." "Now, just a minute, Captain," the first officer said. "And a colossal green grasshopper." "Captain," the first officer said sharply. "Captain, please. And a mammoth spider." "Oh dear, he's been at the drink again," whispered the second officer. A simply enormous centipede." Screamed the captain. "Call the ship's doctor," the first officer said. "Our captain is not well." A moment later, the great round ball disappeared into a cloud, and the people on the ship never saw it again. Chapter 24. But up on the peach itself, everyone was still happy and excited. "I wonder what we'll finish up this time," the earthworm said. "Who cares?" they answered. "Seagulls always go back to land sooner or later." Up and up they went, high above the highest clouds, the peach swaying gently from side to side as it floated along. "Wouldn't this be a perfect time for a little music?" the ladybird asked. "How about it, old grasshopper?" "With pleasure, dear lady," the old grasshopper answered, bowing from the waist. "Ooh, hooray, he's going to play for us," they cried. And immediately the whole company sat themselves down in a circle around the old green musician, and the concert began. From the moment that the first note was struck, the audience became completely spellbound. And as for James, never had he heard such beautiful music as this. In the garden at home on summer evenings, he had listened many times to the sound of grasshoppers chirping in the grass, and he had always liked the noise that they made. But this was a different kind of noise altogether. This was real music, chords, harmonies, tunes, and all the rest of it. And what a wonderful instrument the old green grasshopper was playing upon. It was like a violin. It was almost exactly as though he were playing upon a violin. The bow of the violin, the part that moved, was his back leg. The strings of the violin, the part that made the sound, was the edge of his wing. He was using only the back of his top leg, the thigh, and he was stroking this up and down amongst the edge of his wing with incredible skill, sometimes slowly, sometimes fast, but always with the same easy-flowing action. It was precisely the way a clever violinist would have used his bow, and the music came pouring out and filled the whole blue sky around them with magic melodies. When the first part was finished, everyone clapped madly, and Miss Spider stood up and shouted, "Bravo! Encore! Give us some more!" Did you like that, James? The old green grasshopper asked, smiling at the small boy. Oh, I loved it, James answered. It was beautiful. It was as though you had a real violin in your hands. A real violin, the old green grasshopper cried. Good heavens, I like that. My dear boy, I am a real violin. It is part of my own body. But do all grasshoppers play their music on violins the same way as you do? James asked. No, he answered. Not all. If you want to know, I happen to be a short-horned grasshopper. I have 2 short feelers coming out of my head. Can you see them? There they are. They are quite short, aren't they? That's why they call me a shorthorn, and we shorthorns are the only ones who play our music in the violin style using a bow. My longhorned relatives, the ones who have long, curvy feelers coming out of their heads, make their music simply by rubbing the edges of their top 2 wings together. They are not violinists, they are wing rubbers. And a rather inferior noise those ring rubbers produce. Too, if I may say so, it sounds more like a banjo than a fiddle. How fascinating this all is, cried James. And to think, up until now, I had never even wondered how a grasshopper made his sounds. My dear young fellow, the old green grasshopper said gently, there are a whole lot of things in this world of ours that you haven't started wondering about yet. Where, for example, do you think I keep my ears? Your ears? Why, in your head, of course. Everyone burst out laughing. You mean you don't even know that? Cried the centipede. Try again, said the old green grasshopper, smiling at James. You can't possibly keep them anywhere else. Oh, can't I? Well, I give up. Where do you keep them? Right here, the old green grasshopper said, 1 on each side of my tummy. It's not true. Of course it's true. What's so peculiar about that? You ought to see where my cousins the crickets and the katydids keep theirs. Where do they keep them? In their legs. 1 in each front leg, just below the knee. You mean you didn't know that either? The centipede said scornfully. You're joking, James said. Nobody could possibly have ears in his legs. Why not? Because that's ridiculous, that's why. You know what I think is ridiculous, the centipede said, grinning away as usual. I don't mean to be rude, but I think it is ridiculous to have ears on the sides of one's head. It certainly looks ridiculous. You ought to take a peek in the mirror someday and see for yourself. Pest, cried the earthworm. Why must you always be so rude and rambunctious to everyone? You ought to apologize to James at once. And that is the end of chapter 24. So as you can see, the peach came upon some sharks, and clever James had it lifted up by a flock of seagulls, and now they are heading towards parts unknown. That captain, poor captain, everybody thinks he's crazy for saying he saw all these large insects on top of a flying peach. What do you think's going to happen next? Will they have more adventures and shenanigans, or will they reach land on our next set of chapters? Let me know what you think. Assalamu alaikum. Eid Mubarak. Bye-bye.